Yeah.
Okay, welcome everybody. How lovely to see you all. Long time no see, some of you. Barry, John, Ewan, how are you getting on? Lovely to see you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. And if you're joining us on YouTube, terrific to have you with us. You're going to have to forgive me. I've got a slightly croaky voice. I've been at the inaugural Manufacturing and Engineering Week at the NEC. I don't think I've shaken so many hands, spoken to so many people. Absolutely terrific show, loved it. But it was good to see Phil there. Phil Kernick, it was fantastic to see you there. I thought it was a reasonable, reasonable is underdoing it. It was a very good launch event, and they do have the ambition to become the Hannover Messe of the UK. That is going to be interesting to see how that pans out, because that is one heck of an ambition. Anyway, the subject of this discussion really stems out of the debate panel discussion I had with Julia Moore of Reshoring UK. I'm hoping she's going to be able to join us. And with Tony Haig of PP Control and Automation, hoping he's going to be able to join us. I know that Professor Mike Lewis isn't. He texted me just a few minutes ago to say that he had completely forgotten he was taking his mother out for a birthday dinner. Now, that has got to be a very legitimate excuse for not joining us. But I have to say it was really good to get to know Mike a little bit better. I think he's an incredibly interesting and wise guy. And he is professor of operations and supply, as he says, the making and the selling and the supply chains and everything in between. So very knowledgeable man on the subject. What really intrigued me about the debate, and please, I just want you all to jump in, because this is a very, very interesting and potentially contentious issue. What really interested me was that it's nothing like as simple. You guys are at the coalface, I'm not. Nothing like as simple just to say, heck, we'll just bring manufacturing back to the UK. It was very, very obvious from what Mike was saying, and Julia herself, even though she's a passionate advocate of reshoring and has founded the Reshoring UK website. Even she agrees that this is not going to happen overnight, that's in for the long haul. Most particularly, this is what really shocked me, is the very evident fact that we in the UK, by just going for the lowest possible price, and that's understandable, it's all about the bottom line. As Mike put it, he said, people offshored their production, but it happened in a policy vacuum. And what was happening when they were dealing with, perhaps let's take China as an example, it's obviously the main one. When they were dealing with Chinese suppliers, what they didn't realize was that the Chinese suppliers were not operating in a policy vacuum. They were very much part of a very deliberate and very political decision by the Chinese government, which worked hand in hand. And he gave the example of Apple when they first went to get Foxconn. I think it's Foxconn Taiwan. I may be wrong, but whenever they went into China to get iPhones made, it was very clear that they would have to share some of the IP. And what happened to us in the UK and other Western countries was actually there was a kind of I don't quite know what you'd call it, but it was almost like a sort of quiet coup taking place inside our manufacturing sector. And to try and reverse that now, when we've lost a lot of capability, a lot of capacity, and a lot of IP, is not going to happen overnight, and it will take the kind of response that is happening in the United States. I saw an article in the Guardian just today to say that the American government, I'll see if I can find it and share the headline with you. The American government is launching a policy overview to see what should be done, how they should deal with actually bringing manufacturing back. What steps do they need to take inside the USA at a policy level to help manufacturers reshore, because they see it as a strategic issue. It's not one that, it's just a question of let the market decide, which is very much the philosophy that obtains in Westminster these days and has done for many a year. So anyway, I'd like people to perhaps jump in with any experiences they've had around trying to bring something back, or some product production back, beg your pardon. And while you're doing that, I'm going to find that article and just share it with you from the Guardian today, because I think it's really interesting. So who here, please just jump straight in, has experience or knowledge of any company trying to bring production back to the UK? Who's going to jump in on that?
Well, Nick, I'm happy to jump in. It's been a while since I've been on one of these things, so hello everyone. Good evening. Hope everyone's keeping well. The business that I've recently bought is now involved in, one of the reasons why I basically bought it was to play to the trend of reshoring and onshoring of UK manufacturing, or manufacturing back to the UK. And I think, a number of the customers that we're working with are, I'd almost use the analogy or the expression, it's gone from just-in-time manufacturing to just-in-case. So they're looking at having to have an element of manufacturing here in the UK that might be, to use description, sort of almost a surge capacity and the sort of security of supply, whereas the base load and for manufacturing the majority of their products, and I'm talking about with smoke alarms, fire detectors, and the like. But it's true of a raft of different types of products. They're still being manufactured in, let's say, what were previously known as low-cost countries, whether that be the Philippines, China, Vietnam, or various other countries in Asia. But they also realise that they have to have an element of local manufacture. Because the cost of not being able to ultimately supply product to end customers is far higher than the savings that they might get on pence per unit or pounds per unit of ultimately now living in a world where the supply chain is getting disrupted for all sorts of reasons that nobody could have thought about 5 years ago or 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's really interesting. The people are talking now about dual sourcing, and there's people obviously holding stock. Phil from Three Way Presses, can you talk about any stock levels? Because you've been manufacturing for the British market a long time. Was there anything that you had made outside of the UK?
Yeah, evening. I don't know if you can hear me all right.
Yeah.
I'm actually sat in my bedroom, keeping out the way, keeping quiet. So sorry, guys. But I am decent. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we own Paterson's Photographic, and we do buy some products from China. Things like the umbrellas and the light stands, and the bags, simply because we just can't get anywhere near the target price, if I'm honest, and it's as blunt as that. But what we have done is we have some ball and sockets, and we used to buy 3 ball and sockets or 4 ball and sockets, depending on what the customer needed. And when lockdown came, it always bugged me. And as you know, Nick, we'd started up a CNC shop, so that then gave me the benefit to do that, which then urged me to go ahead to do that. And I then designed a ball and socket, a small version and a large version, but I made sure that they were interchangeable. So the small ball and socket would take about 2 kilos, the large version would take about 12 kilos, and the heaviest camera on the market is about 2.5 kilos. So it was well within the remit and the spec of what we needed. And we launched them last year at the Photographic Show. And the beauty we did is I designed them whilst we were on so-called 3-week lockdown in March in 19. And we then manufactured them, and we used to buy them in for about 24 quid, around that margin. We're now manufacturing for about £12, just under 13 quid, I think it is, you know, and it's made solely in our factory. But more so than that, what I did is I got 4 ball and sockets down to 2. So I did a small one, which is quite compact. And as people may know, most cameras and tripods have a 3/8 or a quarter BSW thread on them, which is a very coarse thread, so it can go to plastic, aluminium, and it's the strongest one to hold in that sort of short level. And so what I did is I made the top point on the ball and socket reversible, and I also made an insert. So the hole in the bottom of the ball and socket was a 3/8, but then I made an insert which went in there, which also converted it to quarter. And then you could rotate the thread around on the top, which had a quarter end and a 3/8 end. And I hope you're getting this, sorry guys. And what you were able to do then is adjust the camera plate, and you could make it universal. So it almost made it a 5/6 in one sort of thing. So you can now just buy one ball and socket made in the UK, and it fits any camera and fits any tripod, you know. So that was one of our successes, you know. But as you know as well, you know, we 3 years ago I set up a CNC shop, and we're now sourcing 35,000 turn parts. I looked to buy a company who were doing some of my stuff in the UK, but actually when I did my due diligence, I was 35% of his 75% of his order book. So it was pointless me buying my own order book, if I'm blunt and honest. So we didn't get to where we needed to get to for the building and the assets, as I put it. So I then decided to go about my own route, to be honest. So I bought I've got 2 B12 machines coming on Saturday, and then I'm up to 14 CNC machines. So we're now manufacturing about 35,000 turn parts a month in the space of 3 years. So, and all that work was reshored back to the UK. And what that did for my customer, instead of them having to have their peaks and troughs in paying for stuff up front, they're able now to sort of leave me to manage that Kanban, leave me to manage the quality, leave me to manage the whole concept. So that just took a massive amount of heartache out of his life, to be honest, as a purchaser, and allowed him to concentrate on other things. And from that, to be honest, it's just stemmed and stemmed and stemmed. And you know, I do some work for a water company, and they gave us a load of brass parts which they were buying in China, and I think I was just about 2% over. But actually, when you brought in all the hassle factor and the management structure of it and all the other implications that it brings, you know, we succeeded. So yeah, we've been very heavily on a track of doing that as well.
That's really interesting. And anybody who, pardon me, was here with Tim Mulqueen of Ramfoam, we did a Kaizen Central a good few months ago with him now. He made PPE visors for the NHS government contract, 115 million quid. He worked out that he could make a better visor than the NHS was buying from China, in 2 parts, not 5, and for £2 per item, not £5. And yeah, you know, I'm you know, it struck me that there is that element of design and ingenuity that you've just talked about, Phil, that we have in the UK. And so while I think there are a lot of issues around reshoring, around, you know, the whether we've got enough of the skills base and whether we got enough knowledge in some places, I think there are going to be some really interesting examples. Barry, you've got your hand up. What would you like to add to the discussion?
Well, slightly controversial in I'm just still not convinced. And, you know, they're great examples. I mean, Phil, you could have been indecent, and I'd have loved that. I mean, it was phenomenal, you know, listening to that detail. And I get it, because we've got some talent there that's obviously making it happen. But I was at an event yesterday at the Commons. It was the launch of a digital paper. And, you know, it's about adoption of digitalization in the UK. And you know what? We never once talked about the global market. Not one politician. We put Milton Keynes up on a pedestal, saying, you know, they've got robots going around Milton Keynes. No one said what happens in China or Korea or anything like that. And we were sloping into, you know, British navel gazing of being, you know, arrogant. Everyone should buy British because we're just bloody brilliant, you know. And people mentioning, you know, we digitized in 3 months what would have took 3 years normally. Well, do you not think Germany did that? Do you not think, China did that during lockdowns, or we're the only ones that got off our asses and did it? And until the masses, until we can move our productivity from wherever in the world, 39th in the world or 32nd in the world, wherever it is, to higher up, how are we going to compete on price? Because it's great. What has just happened, be it COVID and Brexit, has pushed the this onshoring desire. The customer desires to have that, pain removed. That I'm pretty sure within the culture change of another 5-year cycle, it'll go back to, but you are 7% more expensive, or 17% more expensive, or 37% more expensive than where I can get it from. And I'm just watching it, from a distance and saying, I'm not convinced that we're going to onshore it unless we can get strategic about that onshoring. And so that someone can look at what are we importing into the UK and set up, and the government puts some money behind it and say, hey, we import 30 billion pounds worth of batteries. Let's build, X amount of gigafactories. Or we import goat's milk and it's the second biggest import. Let's go and buy a load of goats. Until there's a strategic way of looking at what we, of lack of, I just don't think we'll get to where we need to get to. But
can I come in there? Yeah, I mean, I was at a stairlift manufacturer today, and 10 years ago, I used to make all the seat parts, the trade parts, and all the mouldings that went on those stairlifts. And they hadn't sort of produced anything in this country. We still made parts for them. And ironically, now they had all their 4 chairs made in the Far East, and they're now looking to bring it back into Europe. Which I found absolutely quite ironic, to be honest. And we've developed a disability seat belt which allows disabled people to put the seat belt on their chair and also go up the stairlift as well, because about 90% of people who use stairlifts don't actually put the belt on. So we're putting a sensor in it as well, so it won't work. So it does force those issues. And it was ironic that they're now looking to reshore all the work back within the UK and Europe. And yet they sell probably 20,000 units every 2 months, I think the lady said. So we are seeing a lot of it. And I think with the freight costs, and I think with container costs, and I think with the carbon footprint as well now coming in, and companies now starting to take that seriously because of 2035, I think we've got to be at that point. I think people will start to look at that and take that more seriously. But as far as I'm concerned, as a manufacturer, we are seeing that. We're seeing a lot of it, and the inquiries are quite buoyant in that sense.
Especially stuff. I am 6 times the price of an Indian manufacturer. Yeah, and the biggest global economy by 2030 will be India. How do I compete in India being 6 times the price of their local manufacturers? Yeah. And Playdale are seen as, the beacon where we're super productive and we turned it around and stuff like that. We've still got a long way to go. And at this moment in time, we've got, hyperinflation here and wage hikes and all of this. It's all pushing against the wrong way, isn't it? So it's got to be around productivity. We've just got to become slicker, faster, better.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. Yeah. And, as I said earlier, there's some things we can't make for the right price, but predominantly we are bucking the trend, and we are seeing that step in that direction, to be honest. But I think the culture is changing as well.
Well, I think I would agree that the culture anyway needed to change, and that's good. And another thing Mike Lewis said that we might perhaps not take into account is that actually parts of the globalization process through which all this offshoring took place meant that developing countries could develop their economies faster and could make their citizens more wealthy, able to buy goods that we in the Western world, I wouldn't necessarily say totally we in the UK, make. So there has to be some kind of balance. We can't just say, bring it all back home and put up the shutters, because obviously that's nonsense, because, just on the basis of price and everything else. But equally, there is a sort of macro global issue here where we want people in other countries to have decent lives and to be able to buy the products and the services that are produced. Stephen, you've got your hand up, mate. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah, the barbie's going, so it better be the fair hour, or the coals will be the wrong temperature for the tuna. Okay, but from my point of view, and just as Barry might want to comment, why is increasing productivity any more difficult than applying lean? And if you want to apply lean nowadays, you need some proper digitization. So, in other words, I think on the back of proper digitization to provide you with good inventory control, good control of your production line, good views of your stock, where it's coming from your suppliers, all that stuff. In other words, doing digital transformation properly and doing lean should get us to a position where we are competitive, because we can do it. Particular companies that choose that can do it, but it's not being done broadly enough. And that is a sort of incentive or policy decision that would need to be made by the government to support that sort of lean transition. It's never worked in countries without a proper government strategy. So somebody prove me wrong.
Yeah, okay. John Hardwick, you got your hand up. I was actually going to come to you because Northwest Manufacturers Alliance, clearly you've got a lot of members up there, and you must be drawing some input from them.
Well, why I put my hand up was just come back to Steve as a lean practitioner and Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt. I agree, but even I would say that there are two things. There's the lean, but also the investment in capital. There's an awful lot of the situations where you identify waste. Putting the automation in place is actually the way to drive up the productivity. You can do so much with lean, but in the end, some of the activities you're doing should be automated. They're low skilled, they are not expensive to put in place, but I just don't think, for whatever reason, leaders of our manufacturing organizations are investing heavily enough in smart capital for automation, and not just the electrical and electronics and the AI bit, but actually the mechanical automation that could be done.
I would agree. And isn't that why it needs a government strategy?
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. Love it if they put some proper investment into getting lean transformations going and backed it up with the capital as well as the revenue costs of doing that.
Yeah, it does demand the kind of attention span that history proves we haven't had from politicians for a very long time. I don't want to turn this into a politician bashing exercise, because lovely and satisfying though that is, it doesn't get us anywhere. Except to say that people like yourself, Barry, you are there in the House of Commons on these committees and making presentations. What you said earlier was deeply worrying. Joe Dancy is with us tonight, and Joe has worked with Peter Mandelson when he was business secretary. I think I'm right with that, Joe. I mean, before I come back to Adam, just to take that point, Joe, does it really surprise you how little political interest there is in this nationally strategic issue?
Yeah, good to meet you all. And yeah, my background is not so much running manufacturing companies, but I work as a consultant with some industrial companies, principally, and helping them engage with government, whether it's on projects, but more widely. I mean, Nick and I, we were having this chat yesterday in Birmingham, and it doesn't surprise me, unfortunately. I think the experience that I've certainly had when working with clients, engage with BEIs, whether that's ministers but actually I think the challenge is, and it's not really a defense of politicians or ministers per se, I think it's the challenge of just a group think in Whitehall. And I think there's a Treasury orthodoxy, which, certainly the experience we have is, well, a question. I mean, say in the steel industry, for example, they're engaged and they understand the importance of Port Talbot and Scunthorpe and other places, but it comes down, it always seeps back to but if it is cheaper from China, why don't we just do that? And I think, that is something which, you can have an argument with, but, you could educate officials. Actually, sometimes it works. I think sometimes we've engaged with ministers who are, they certainly don't want to have a reliance on overseas, but people move on, and the first time you meet their replacement, the response is, but isn't it just cheaper to buy it from China? And so I just think this pervasiveness is a huge problem. I think the way it's characterized, it seems so often in Westminster, is about this sort of being Barry, I think you put it very well, the kind of, instead of this being a way for people to, rely on state procurement to sort of pay higher prices and sort of say, well, we don't worry about the efficiency side. I don't think but I think it's a lazy characterization from especially places like Treasury. I think you now look, the way it's often portrayed is sort of, we're going back to a 1970s industrial strategy, and sort of DeLorean is the kind of the classic example they use. But, you just have to look at, the FT had last year, the former head of the US Marine Corps talking about the devastating strategic vulnerabilities for the US and Europe on things like manufacturing and transport with rare earths from China, replacing the dependence on oil from OPEC countries to China. And I think if you look at what's happened in Ukraine, we've been relatively unscathed compared to countries which have been more reliant on Russian gas and are closer to Russia. But, do any of us really think in our lifetimes or our working lifetimes, China isn't going to try and go into Taiwan? I think we've been warned now. And I think if places like Britain, European Union and United States, if we aren't taking this seriously, then we've been warned, and we'll only have ourselves to blame. But I think it's vital to get voices like I've been heard tonight actually in and making this point very persistently across the political spectrum, really.
Yeah, thank you. It was really good to see you in Birmingham as well, Joe. Great. Adam, you're first in the queue. Good to see you.
The thing I was going to come back to, we were talking about the conversation with lean and things like that. Now, lean, from an aspect of productivity, you can't take in isolation from a robotic point of view. To have lean, you have to have operational excellence in both logistics and operations. Because you can have the most leanest process out, but if you're not shipping it to the next process for the next 7 days because it's over the road or down on another industrial estate, what's the point? Because you need to track that first and sort that out. So we got elongate lead times. I've been in a number of businesses now where they needed to move and shift, but the site isn't there. There's no site, so the infrastructure isn't there. So what they do is they build a unit that's across the road. So you've now got to trounce product across the road into another unit. That's a productivity hit because you haven't got operational excellence in logistics. So you can't take it in isolation. You have to look at the whole. And that's some of the things, for me, if the other day we were traveling from Castle Donington a few weeks back, because I've been driving Castle Donington to Loughborough, 8 miles. Yeah, 55 minutes because of the road structure and because of what was happening. Again, that hits productivity. So the infrastructure around how we distribute everything. So you can't just look in isolation. Automation, you can automate as much as you want. But if you've got shit processes outside of that, it ain't going to work. So, you've got to look at the whole system process. I've done, billion turnover businesses in lean change management. It ain't easy as just looking at one isolation. You have to look at the whole, and everything works from that. So that was just my opinion.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And again, in this country, that understanding. I was just driving up to Birmingham the other day on the A34. I couldn't believe how many trucks were on the road, how slow everything was, and improving the infrastructure is as important as helping companies improve their own internal processes. Sorry, the voice is going a bit. Barry, please.
Yeah, just to come back on a few of the points and what was discussed yesterday was, culture eats strategy, doesn't it? And all of those things that you just talked about are strategy. And if the UK's not got the culture, then, we're pissing in the wind, aren't we? And unfortunately, it's the working culture, and £1 billion businesses, you know what? They've got that culture, but the SMEs are the biggest part of the market. And there's huge opportunity, and Ewan will say that, you can go in businesses and turn them around, and that's it's great what we've done at Playdale, but until we can get the mass culture, and the government officials yesterday were saying, how do we help? And that's, what is it, Ronald Reagan, I'm from the government type thing, it's how do I help? Run like stink. But Sage, and it was a Sage report, and Sage are obviously, an accounting system, but Sage have turned to the TV and are doing prime time TV adverts at the moment about how to, digitize making it real for small businesses on how they, digitize their accountancy systems. Now, everybody in the UK knows to wash their hands or cough into their elbow. The government got that message out there, and it's like, well, maybe you can help by getting the message out there of what the possibility is, and that's what was discussed doing this tonight. If we could get that, my nephew was on, if you didn't know, was on Britain's Got Talent at the weekend. His followers have gone from 300 to, like, I don't know, 15,000 in a week. He's got a bigger voice now than Kwasi Kwarteng. So we need to get Jamie and his puppet out there and doing stuff. But if we can get the government to get the message out there, Sage are leading the way. Why don't we get it on TV? Why don't we show what the culture's about? If many people know what the possible is. And just going back to what you were saying about, reliance on China. If you were at the, I thought it was a great talk William Hague did at the Make UK conference, where he talked about, Russia's control and China. It's not through armies anymore. It's about, building pipelines, and that's how they've got it over us. And I think we've got an opportunity. The government are seeing that like, oh shit, you said we've had the warning. Oh shit, Europe's relying on their oil. China, we're relying on their factories. I think there's a window of opportunity here for us to be able to push back as an industry and say, let's take the control away from China. Let's take the control away from Russia. Now's the time to invest in British manufacturing to make sure that we've got security on our shores. And I think if we can start to use the word security, then saying poor old manufacturing, it might just be another angle.
Yeah, national security is absolutely, what the United States, that article, the link I just posted, they're treating it as a matter of national security, and it has to be seen at that level by ministers at the moment. They got their heads in different places, as Steve said earlier, at the moment.
Just one last point that was made a lot, and people said access to capital yesterday. Yeah, but we've got, when we talk about automation and digitization, we're all shit scared, excuse my language, of saying it's going to, some jobs aren't going to survive. Yeah, well, the economy will be stronger for it, and companies will be more profitable, and it'll go elsewhere. But every single form for money says how many jobs will you secure or make by doing this? And the government, we're in overemployment at the moment, and the government are still asking how many jobs we'll create before they'll release that grant. And that isn't driving, the productivity gains that we want, because we're just employing people to sit at a new computer. Well, that isn't how you get those gains. We're not going to be globally competitive by putting bums on seats. We've got to automate it, and they've got to get that message as well. And, that was said loud and clear yesterday.
Funny, I was talking to the Made Smarter people at the KTN today, and it's very clear to me that the whole organization about it, they've got silos emerging inside the Made Smarter initiative, which means actually that it's dragging its feet, it's held back because they don't talk to each other. Absolute madness. Ewan, over to you.
Yeah, hi there. I just wanted to pick up on a point that Joseph made, and also what Barry's just said. I think part of the challenge with government is it's often focusing on the wrong metrics. There's take FDI, foreign direct investment, as an example. it's good news from an FDI perspective if a big overseas player comes and buys one of our businesses. Well, that might be great for that year's FDI metrics, but it's completely rubbish from an investment perspective in terms of where the future investment is going to go. Because at the first sign of trouble, tends to be that those companies then retrench back to their home country, and the satellite business or the satellite offices is left to sort of wither on the vine. So I think there's an element of we need to try and categorize or just reset the way that sometimes the government uses these metrics to understand whether it's been successful or not. And I guess the sort of tied in with that, is the whole national security piece. So again, politically, it's great the government can say, oh, we're looking at a certain takeover of a particular company. But again, they're being reactive to an event that's happened. A company gets bought on the stock market or an offer's made for it, and the government then gets involved rather than saying, well, look, this is actually a strategically important sector. And therefore, or we're going to invest in this particular area as a cluster. And we're then going to actually, put some money behind this in the way that the Chinese do over a 5-year plan, or it's the second 2-year, 5-year plans, 3-year, 5-year plans as well. I mean, it comes back, and I know we continue to beat the same drum, but we're not actually asking for any money. We're just asking for a better structural environment in which we can then get on and basically, make S's become M's and M's become L's.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. You talk about foreign companies and FDI and all that. Yes, there is an argument for FDI, but it stuns me that politicians think that it's a good thing to sell the crown jewels to people who've got the cash from overseas instead of building our own crown jewels. A classic example just today. CF Fertilizers UK Limited. It's not UK Limited. It's an American company. It's closed its Insight in Cheshire, and it's going to ravage agriculture. Yeah, they make nitrogen fertilizer, and it's an absolute body blow. But they're based in America, and it's like Ford closing the Bridgend plant. If companies are owned by and British companies operating in their local communities, it's far, you don't just sort of draw a line through it and say, okay, well, let's get out of there. You think very much. I remember David McMurtry at Renishaw talking about this. He was horrified and appalled. This is some years ago now, but he was horrified by the fact that so many of our companies were owned by overseas owners. And Phil, yesterday we were talking, weren't we, about aerospace defense and all of that, and the probability of any of those companies bringing any manufacturing back to Britain is sort of 0 to 0.
Yeah, talked a bit about that yesterday. It's quite interesting. I think I'm with Barry here. I'm definitely with Barry. Strategically, we've got government needs to look through all of the imported products and target what are the most appropriate products to target to inward invest and develop back into the UK. It's no good just aerospace is a well, you guys probably know the same thing as I do, that all of the aerospace companies in the UK are not owned by UK corporates, except for BAE Systems and Rolls-Royce. The rest of them are all now subsidiaries of European companies, Thales, Meggitt's owned by the States, Eaton, etc., acquisitioned over the years. So when procurement policy and strategy is worked on, the same with Leonardo, then the procurement policy and decisions are made outside of our country. So the strategy and approach is not driven or owned by us. So as a consequence, we do not have the pull to make that decision. The other big dynamic which has happened in the aerospace sector for quite a while is offset obligations, massive offset obligations. Rolls-Royce signed orders with Singapore Airlines with engines, and surprise, surprise, Singapore Airlines worked together with their government. They had an industrial strategy of investing and developing in country, and Rolls-Royce had to build factories out there. and obviously those aircraft are being serviced and supported out there. So other countries are very smart in what they do. Large corporate organizations collaborate together with their government and come up with an approach. And it's the same with India. India wants to industrialize, and still want to do that. So all of these countries are doing that heavily. So that really restricts us. The other simplistic one is it's extremely costly to recertify parts in aerospace. Not the basic brackets and componentry, but all of the critical parts in an aircraft have to have full traceability. I used to work for Rolls-Royce, and 25 years ago, I outsourced getting on for about 3,000 gear parts when we closed the gear shop in Rolls-Royce. And we had to transfer those parts to South Africa, to America, and to another country as well. So they got split to the four winds. And that process of transferring those parts took 4.5 years to transfer them all. Not all of them got transferred. There's still a legacy cell in Bristol doing some that nobody wanted to take up because they were so complex. But the process of doing that, in those days, there was about a 15 to 20 signatory process that every part had to go through on first article and last article approval, with everything from the chief engineer, design engineer to sign it. So very, very risk averse. Reasons being quality, reason being design creep, making sure there's no design creep. So lots of good reasons why we want an aircraft to be maintained and fly effectively. And those processes are very laborious and very, very costly. So that's why, even with dual sourcing, setting up a dual source, there is a huge cost to that.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Roy Spencer, sorry to have kept you waiting.
That's okay. I really wanted just to add to what Joseph said and one or two other people. Joseph, you mentioned about China and Taiwan, but if you look across the globe, there are other pinch points which could affect our resilience. You only have to look at the Suez Canal as one, and it takes a holistic view, really, of the political situation around the globe and what's strategic to Britain as a business, because there seems an inability to look at both the resilience across the globe and the potential pinch points and conflicts, and what actually we need to produce locally. It's not joined up. The thinking is what I'm saying. We have a foreign office, and how do they relate to the other parts that are concerned with what we actually manufacture in this industry? And as a consequence, there's a lack of foresight on what actually a strategic industry is.
Yeah, I think that goes back to that national security issue, doesn't it? Tony Haig, I'm sorry he wasn't able to join us. He in the debate, he was talking about a new phenomenon he read about in a McKinsey report. It was called friend shoring, and he's a contract manufacturer, controls and automation, and they service OEMs. And he said he's actually seeing it. Friend shoring is described as working with companies who share your values. Doesn't necessarily mean they have to be in the same country, but it's more of this sort of goes with the sort of suspicion that China's future reliability and motivations shouldn't be 100% trusted. And so friend shoring was quite an interesting way of putting it. And I don't know. I mean, he says he's seeing it already, where people are looking at value more than price. And I mean, obviously, you've got to, prices have to be attractive, but not as necessarily just the prime arbiter of any decision making. That if you do factor in values, this is what bang the drum I've been banging about procurement in the UK. There's guidance to this effect in the government, but no, it's not statutory by any means. That when they're putting out tenders, there should be a value component to it, a knock-on value to the local community. What's the social value of a contract? The ram foam story was amazing. The number of jobs that were created, not just immediately, but also across the value chain, right down to the sandwich van. When you've got economic activity brought about by a government contract, that has created, it's not necessarily difficult, I wouldn't have thought, to put a value on it and some kind of formula. It's rather like reshoring. The reshoring initiative in America, they've got a calculator that says, okay, so your price is 10 cents for that part, but what's the real price? What's the real price? And all the fees you got for the foreign exchange and the transportation, blah blah blah, etc. It usually works out much more expensive, and I think we need to have that realistic viewpoint of just how cheap are some of these things, and also have the social value element to it. And I think if government was to adopt a much stronger social element to its procurement policies, still got to provide good stuff, still got to provide good products, but I think that would make a huge difference. The sad story about the ram foam was the contract was 115 million, but they only got 75 because the government felt they had to fulfill a contract with China and they couldn't be seen to cancel it. And so Ramphone was told effectively, okay, we're stopping that now, even though you're 40% of the Chinese price, etc. It's just like, maddening, as you expect. John, thank you.
Just going to pick up on your 2 points there. I think there were two slightly different but possibly overlapping things you discussed there. So the societal benefits of investment and bringing stuff back on shore, I'm sure there's something we can do there in terms of our decision making to build that in terms of the knock-on effects to the economy. And they're well known, the cascade that happens by having manufacturing. And I think it was you that circulated some papers on that about, are economists actually looking at manufacturing in the right way, because they're not taking full account of that cascade effect. But I think that is slightly different to the concept of the friendshoring as I understood it. And I suppose just to take a converse view, or a view that may not be shared, but how far away is that from the old boys network? How do you get shared values and shared views? It's at a personal and interpersonal level, and therefore how do you get that? By building relationships. And are relationships the most effective way to make your decisions on who your business partners are going to be? So I think that there are some issues around friendshoring, and depending on what your interpretation of the motivation behind it. Having said that, if the shared values are to the good of society, then that's brilliant.
Yeah, I've just Googled friendshoring, and two top stories that came up: just say no to friendshoring in the Jordan Times, and Mint say no to friendshoring before it reverses the gains of globalization. Fascinating. Yeah, it was. And it was Janet Yellen speaking to the Atlantic Council in April. She's the U.S. Treasury Secretary. Issued a welcome call for revitalizing the world economic order, but she also generated headlines with a single sentence advocating what she called friendshoring, that is, limiting the trade of key inputs to trusted countries in order to reduce risks to the supply chains on which the US and its partners rely. So it's really more about countries, the origin of the countries, rather than the companies, John, in that sense. So I did get it slightly wrong. It's more about a sort of more national strategic level. Ewan.
Hi there. I'm just going to say, we talked about potentially, trying a different tactic or a different tack with the government, talking about the importance of certain sectors or just industry generally from a sort of national security perspective. I mean, one of the other areas that we're beginning to look at ourselves is actually trying to sort of break down the carbon footprint of the individual product that our customers produce through the automation process, so that you can truly understand, if you produce whatever it might be, whether it's a coffee cup or a thermos flask or a phone or a pair of headphones, the carbon footprint element of that, so that you can then actually sell, that knowledge and that capability and that understanding of what that carbon footprint is to your customer, who can then obviously sell it onto their end customers, so that you can truly understand the benefits of reshoring manufacturing back to the UK from a carbon footprint perspective. And I think that will become more and more powerful, as it becomes more and more, not just interesting from a political perspective, but ultimately from an end consumer and end customer perspective as well, to be able to actually prove, not just sort of, say, oh, well, yes, we produce a battery, and the battery, the equivalent amount of, whatever it is, tons of emissions is X, but actually get that down to the individual product and the individual component level, so you can then build it up. I think that is where a lot of manufacturers will start getting some competitive advantage going forward.
And it's going to be interesting to see also whether there are carbon taxes and what impact that will have. I mean, carbon taxation will obviously add to the cost of bringing something in from overseas rather than making it at home. But that article I just shared, it does talk about protectionism rearing its ugly head, just disguising itself in cozy phrases like friend shoring and carbon taxation and all that. Joe.
Yeah, I was just going to respond. I guess I think, as you said, to what Roy said, and I think you're totally right about the Suez Canal side and where these things come from. And I thought it was interesting. I mean, we looked at, not go back to steel again, but the tariffs that came on from the United States against steel from the European Union whilst we were still members, they were raised. The tariff was removed on European steel before it was removed on British steel. There could be different reasons for that, but clearly the United States uses tariffs to protect its own industry in the same way that France uses domestic procurement to protect its industry. Germany uses things like reduced energy prices to support its own industry. I'm not sure Britain has a comparable strategy in terms of, so we fight free trade, but not on a free level playing field, as it were. But part of the justification from the United States was because the bulk of the British steel market was now owned by companies, one from India, one from China, and they could justify it, and Congress people could justify it, because this was a way for China and India to get around the back of the tariff, because Britain did not have a domestically owned steel industry. And I think going to what as Ewan said, I think this point about ownership, and then this point about the strategic side, or how does the Foreign Office approach this in terms of national interest? Well, I think we then start to get into sort of complicated questions where you look at a company like British Steel, which is owned by a Chinese company, but ultimately must be controlled by the Chinese state. That if we're talking about protecting steels to go into sensitive parts of the British security, into the submarines or to other parts of defense manufacturing, how does a Chinese company, what details do they have about our steel mix and assets that come from ownership there? Can they shut this down if they don't want this, if Britain takes a more hostile view against China, as we've seen with the submarine deal with Australia and the United States? And I think that's just something different, where I think the French seem to have a much more strategic approach to their assets. And the steel mill, which services their rail industry and rail tracks, they would never bring that steel in from overseas. That is made in France, but it was owned by Liberty Steel. And when Liberty's got its own problems now, whilst Liberty wanted to sell it on, the French government were absolutely clear that it was their decision whether or not they could sell it and whether or not it was part of their domestic, not just their industrial, not just the jobs in those plants, but did this meet their infrastructure and their sort of national security approach. And I think that is the bit which, you know, I think you're right. It's cultural. It's not just strategic. But this is a conversation which Britain needs to get me a lot more alive to. And you know, your voice is the way to do that.
Well, yeah, we were talking, weren't we, Joe, about, you know, Jonathan Reynolds, the Shadow Business Secretary, seems to have a much more proactive view of industrial strategy, and he's going to be making Labour's pitch in October. Around when is that conference season or just after? But either way, it's round about the conference season. So Labour will be making their pitch to the sector on the economy and everything else later on in the year. It'd be fascinating to see what he says. Steve, hope your barbecue's okay, mate. Hope the coals are getting.
I don't know. It'll be okay. I'll survive. No, my point is, I think I see a serious problem with friendshoring, in the sense that if pushed too far, it quite simply creates power blocks, and power blocks are quite simply more likely to go to war than people well integrated by trade. So while I think I think we have to find a way of being more effective at trading with people like China and trading with Russia, to influence them of what we offer, in terms of of an open trade deal. I don't think China is a very open market to us, but by continuing to work with them over the long term, we can help them and influence them in opening their internal markets. I think by pulling out too much, we will create powerful separate areas, which in China it will try and spread its sphere of influence, and it'll invade Taiwan. So I think that trade is absolutely essential to guarantee a stable world.
Yeah, and I get that, Steve. I mean, that is absolutely crucial. I mean, you know, global trade has been a force for good, no matter what we might say about, you know, the effects of offshoring and all of that. But by the same token, you know, if you start to rely on overseas suppliers, and then things go sideways on you, such as the global shocks we've had, one of them self-inflicted, but you know, the pandemic, and now Ukraine. You've got to moderate. You've got to look at ways that this national security question, with trade as a national security issue, not as just as an economic issue. I think if we start doing that, then perhaps we'll get a more well. I mean, somebody talked about level playing fields. I mean, you know, honestly, with the way other countries have political industrial strategies, we're turning up to a gunfight with a penknife, and they just don't understand it at Westminster, and that is the core issue. They just don't understand it. But yeah, Joe, you're right. I mean, you know, us saying these things, and you know, a little later in the year when the community started to settle down and it starts to generate its own energy, we will be moving into, you know, creating the book I spoke of, and then doing the TV show. We probably won't get around to the TV show till next year, but it's going to be really interesting to try and get an awful lot of the things that we talk about so regularly, but down on paper, and in such a way that we can start to make a bit of noise about it. So that is very definitely something to look forward to. My voice is just about to die. So as the witching hour gets to 7 o'clock, which it has just now, I'm going to say thank you very much, everybody, for a fascinating discussion. And I'll see you all again very soon. But it's been absolutely wonderful. Thank you for being here and bringing so much to the party. So I'll say good night, farewell, and see you all again soon.